The night was heavy with smoke. May 29th, 1453, Constantinople, the queen of cities, stood trembling on the edge of eternity. For nearly 1,000 years, its walls had defied the tides of enemies. Roman legions no longer marched, emperors no longer thundered across Europe. But still, this city, this last beacon of Byzantium, had endured. Tonight, however, its fate would be decided beneath the fire of iron and the roar of cannons. From the heights of the Theodosian walls, defenders peered into the darkness. Flickering torches stretched across the horizon. An ocean of soldiers gathered under the banner of the crescent moon. Mehmed II, the young sultan of the rising Ottoman Empire, had brought with him not only the fiercest warriors of his time, but a weapon the world had scarcely seen. Cannons so massive they shook the earth when fired, their thunder echoing like the judgment of the gods. As dawn broke, the ground trembled. The first cannonball struck stone, shattering centuries of proud defiance. Again and again, the walls groaned. Dust and mortar filled the air, drowning out prayers whispered in Greek and Latin alike. Priests gathered in Hagia Sophia, that vast dome of light and shadow, chanting hymns of protection as citizens wept beneath the mosaics of Christ and the saints. The city had become both fortress and tomb. The defenders fought with the desperation of men who knew no tomorrow. Archers loosed their arrows, mercenaries clashed with janissaries, and the blood of Greeks, Genoese, and Italians mingled on the broken stones. Emperor Constantine VI, the last emperor of Rome, cast aside his crown, shouting that he would not live as an emperor without an empire. Sword in hand, he vanished into the chaos of battle, his figure swallowed by the tide. And then, the breach. The walls cracked open, the flood poured in, and the heart of Byzantium was silenced beneath the march of Ottoman boots. The empire that had been Rome's last heir, that had kept alive the flame of learning, faith, and empire for over 1,000 years, fell in a single morning. Hagia Sophia became a mosque, its echoes of Christian prayer replaced with the call to prayer of Islam. For the world, it was the dawn of a new age. For Byzantium, it was the end. But what if it wasn't? What if that final morning had been different? What if the walls had held? If the empire had been stronger? If corruption had been cleansed? If allies had come not as looters but as brothers? What if the Byzantine Empire, battered but unbroken, had found the strength to endure? Imagine a Constantinople that did not fall, a Byzantium that remained the bridge between East and West, a guardian of faith and empire, a survivor in the shadow of history. How would the course of Europe, of Christianity, of the Mediterranean world have changed? This is not just a question of battles and kings. It is a question of resilience, of the choices that keep civilizations alive, or let them perish. Before we dive into this reimagined history, remember to subscribe to What If Wars, where we bring you history's greatest turning points reimagined. Join us as we step into the world that might have been. Now, let us turn back. Not to the smoking ruins of May 29th, 1453, but to the centuries before, to the slow unraveling of an empire once destined to last forever. To understand how Byzantium might have survived, we must first understand why it fell. To understand how an empire dies, you must peel back the layers of time and look into its wounds. Byzantium did not collapse in a single night. It bled slowly, cut by 1,000 knives, weakened by choices both within and without. Constantinople's fall in 1453 was the final blow, but the disease had long taken root. The first wound was power itself. Byzantium was born from Rome, yet unlike Rome at its height, succession in Constantinople was rarely certain. Sons fought fathers, brothers fought brothers, generals fought emperors. The empire devoured itself in civil wars, each one leaving its defenses weaker, its treasury emptier. In the mid-14th century, the civil war between John Vital Palaiologos and John VI Kanakouzenos dragged on for 6 bitter years. Farmers abandoned their fields, soldiers deserted their posts, and the Ottomans crept closer, while Byzantium tore itself apart. Victory on the throne meant nothing if the empire itself was hollowed out. Power, once a shield, had become poison. If politics broke the body, religion divided the soul. Byzantium was the fortress of Orthodox Christianity, proud of its faith, yet isolated by it. The schism with Rome in 1054 severed ties with the Catholic West, leaving distrust that festered for centuries. When Crusaders came, they did not come as brothers. They came as predators. The memory of 1204 never healed. The Fourth Crusade, called to liberate the Holy Land, turned its swords instead on Constantinople itself. The city was looted, Hagia Sophia desecrated, relics stolen, treasures melted down. An empire that had stood for nearly a millennium was humiliated by those who claimed the same cross. Byzantines never forgot, and when later appeals for Western aid came, the wounds of betrayal silenced trust. So when the Ottomans rose, Byzantium stood alone. The Latin West hesitated, the Orthodox East fractured, and Constantinople became an island of faith adrift in a hostile sea. Empires are built on wealth, but Byzantium's coffers ran dry. Once Constantinople had been the beating heart of global commerce. Spices from the East, silks from China, furs from Russia, all passed through its markets, filling imperial treasuries. But by the 13th century, Venetian and Genoese merchants controlled the seas, siphoning away wealth that once belonged to Byzantium. The empire's own lands shrank. Anatolia, once the breadbasket of Rome, slipped into Turkish hands after the disaster at Manzikert in 1071. Thrace, Macedonia, even the Peloponnese. Farms burned, peasants fled, harvests withered. With each lost field, the empire's tax base shrank. Armies could not be paid. Fortresses could not be repaired. Constantinople glittered on the surface, but beneath its marble and mosaics lay poverty. An empire without soldiers is a city waiting for its grave. Byzantium's armies, once the terror of the world, dwindled into shadows of their former might. The disciplined ranks of cataphracts, the strategic brilliance of generals like Belisarius, gone. In their place stood mercenaries, men loyal not to the empire but to gold. And when the gold ran out, they vanished. Technology passed Byzantium by. The Ottomans embraced gunpowder, building cannons so large they split stone walls. Byzantium clung to its past, its fortifications mighty against swords but fragile against thunder. By the 15th century, the empire could field only a few thousand defenders against an enemy 10 times its size. Walls that had held for centuries finally cracked under the weight of fire and iron. And then there was the storm itself, the Ottoman Empire. From the ashes of Anatolia rose a power relentless and young, forged in the fires of conquest. The Ottomans seized city after city, fortress after fortress, until Constantinople was surrounded on all sides. By the early 15th century, Byzantium was reduced to a city-state, its borders a shadow of its once vast dominion. The empire became a candle flickering in the wind. Every decision was made under siege, every prayer whispered in fear. The walls still stood, proud and tall, but outside them the world had changed. The empire of Constantine, Justinian, and Basil the Bulgar Slayer had become a relic, waiting for its final hour. So it was that Byzantium fell, not in one night, but over centuries. Corruption, division, poverty, weakness, and enemies too powerful to resist. These were the chains that bound the empire to its fate, the reasons why the greatest city of Christendom crumbled before Ottoman guns. Yet, history is not destiny. These causes, though devastating, were not inevitable. They were choices, crises, failures that might have been overcome. So let us imagine. What if civil wars had been avoided? What if East and West had reconciled, if trust had been rebuilt? What if wealth had flowed once more through Constantinople's streets, if armies had been modernized, if walls had been made to withstand the fire of cannons? What if Byzantium had found the strength to endure? History is not written only by fate. It is written by choices, made or unmade, followed or ignored. Byzantium fell because it stumbled at crossroads again and again. But imagine, just for a moment, if the empire had chosen differently. Not to conquer the world, not to reclaim the lost glory of Rome stretching from Britain to Egypt, but simply to survive, to endure, to protect Constantinople and the lands that still lay in its grasp. The first fracture to heal would be the crown itself. What if succession had been steadier, less drenched in betrayal? Imagine a moment when John V and John VI, instead of tearing the empire apart in civil war, forged a pact of unity. No palace intrigues, no whispers of assassination, no rival armies marching through the empire's own fields. Instead, a vision of survival. The Byzantines had seen too well the cost of division. In this alternate history, a wise emperor understands that unity is the last weapon left. He binds the nobility, the generals, and the clergy into a pact that forbids civil war. It is not a perfect peace. Ambition still simmers, but it is a truce enforced by necessity. With unity, the empire's wounds stop bleeding. With unity, there is at least time to heal. The second wound is harder. Faith. Orthodox and Catholic, East and West, brothers turn to strangers. But what if Byzantium had reached across that chasm, not in desperation as the walls were falling, but generations earlier, when alliance was still possible? Picture a council not unlike the one held in Florence in 1439, but this time embraced not as a hollow compromise, but as a genuine bridge. The emperor kneels not in surrender, but in recognition that survival depends on fellowship. Latin and Greek priests stand side by side, their chants blending in Hagia Sophia. The West remembers its betrayal in 1204, but in this world, Byzantium chooses forgiveness instead of pride. Venetian ships, once feared as looters, now patrol the straits as allies. French knights march not against Constantinople, but alongside it. The empire does not love the West, nor the West the empire, but they recognize that between them stands the Ottoman threat, and unity is the only shield strong enough to face it. With unity comes the chance to rebuild wealth. Imagine an emperor who sees that dependence on Venetian and Genoese merchants is a chain, not a lifeline. Instead of surrendering trade to foreigners, Byzantium reclaims control of its harbors. New taxes fund the repair of walls. New policies encourage farmers to return to abandoned lands in Thrace and western Anatolia. Caravans once more pass through Constantinople, their goods protected by Byzantine soldiers instead of foreign guards. The city's markets stir with life, not the opulence of Justinian's day. Those days are gone. But a steady, breathing economy, enough to feed the army, enough to sustain the state. The empire becomes leaner, poorer than in its golden age, but resilient. And with gold comes soldiers. The empire cannot return to the cataphracts of old, but it can adapt. Imagine a ruler who recognizes the changing face of war, who invests in gunpowder when the first thunderous weapons appear in Europe. Constantinople, once slow to change, becomes a student of necessity. Cannons are mounted on its walls. Engineers are trained to cast bronze and iron. The Theodosian walls, which had stood against Huns and Arabs, now bristle with fire that can answer cannon with cannon. Mercenaries are not abandoned, but supplemented with a small, loyal corps of native troops. Greeks, Armenians, even Slavs, trained to fight not for gold, but for home. A rebuilt navy patrols the Bosporus, preventing the city from being strangled by Ottoman fleets. The empire does not win every battle, but it survives them. Survival becomes its victory. Inside the empire, another change takes root. Religious quarrels had long torn at its heart. Hesychasts against intellectuals, bishops against bishops. In this alternate world, the emperor demands tolerance, not unity of belief, but unity of purpose. The church, instead of feeding division, becomes a balm. Priests preach endurance, not rivalry. Monks in Mount Athos copy manuscripts, scholars teach in schools, artisans build mosaics, not in defiance of each other, but in service to a greater hope. That Constantinople endures, that orthodoxy stands, that the empire survives. This shift does not erase centuries of bitterness, but it mutes them. Byzantium learns that survival depends not on perfection, but on compromise. What emerges from these choices is not a new Rome stretching to the Atlantic. No, this is not that fantasy. Instead, Byzantium becomes smaller, humbler, but stronger. Its borders tighten around Thrace, Macedonia, parts of Greece, and a foothold in western Anatolia. Beyond that, it does not dream. The Balkans remain contested, Anatolia mostly Ottoman, but the empire carves out a core that is defensible, sustainable. Constantinople remains its jewel, Hagia Sophia its heart, the Bosporus its lifeline. Here, at this crossroads of continents, Byzantium does not rule the world, but it survives it, and survival changes everything. with unity instead of civil war, with alliances instead of isolation, with cannons instead of crumbling walls, with trade instead of poverty, the empire that should have ended in 1453 still stands. It is not the Rome of Caesar or Justinian, but it is still Byzantium, still alive, still proud, still the bridge between East and West. But what then? What would such survival mean for the world around it, for the Ottomans at its gates, for the Venetians on the seas, for the Christians divided between Rome and Constantinople? To answer that, we must turn to the ripples of this alternate survival, the consequences that would reshape not just Byzantium, but the entire region. The year is no longer 1453. Constantinople has not fallen. The cross still gleams atop Hagia Sophia. The city's domes still catch the morning sun, and the Bosporus still thrums with the sound of ships passing between continents. An empire once thought doomed has found a way to endure. But survival is never neutral. It reshapes the world around it. The endurance of Byzantium is not only a story of persistence, it is a storm that alters the currents of history. Let us walk through those ripples, one by one. To the east, the Ottomans pause. They had expected Constantinople to fall as easily as Adrianople, as swiftly as Thessaloniki. But now the walls bristle with cannon. Alliances with Venice and Genoa bring fleets into the straits, and Latin knights stand guard beside Greek soldiers. Mehmed's dream of a capital on the Bosporus is denied. The Ottoman advance into Europe slows. They still conquer lands in the Balkans, still clash with Hungary and Serbia, but without Constantinople, the road is narrower, the march more perilous. Their empire expands, yes, but it bends eastward instead of westward. Anatolia absorbs their fury, and Asia becomes their stage. For the West, this is not salvation, but it is reprieve. Vienna does not face Ottoman armies in 1529, or perhaps faces them weaker and later. The balance of power in Europe shifts by decades, maybe centuries, all because Byzantium still holds the key to the straits. In the shadow of Constantinople's survival, another miracle stirs. For centuries, the schism between East and West had been a wound in Christendom, but now, under pressure of necessity, that wound begins to scar instead of fester. The council that once faltered at Florence is remembered differently. In this alternate world, Byzantium's survival proves the worth of compromise. Latin and Greek priests share pulpits, if not hearts. Venice and Genoa trade not as masters but as partners. Pilgrims from the west once again pass through Constantinople on their way to Jerusalem, guarded by Byzantine soldiers. The mutual hatred born in 1204 fades slowly, not erased, but softened. The Orthodox Church remains distinct, its liturgy still sung in Greek, its saints still robed in mosaics of gold, but it no longer stands utterly alone. In a world where Constantinople lives, Orthodoxy breathes with greater confidence, and the East-West divide narrows into a tense but enduring coexistence. What would Europe have been had it faced the Reformation with a stronger living Byzantium beside Rome? Perhaps Martin Luther's hammer still struck Wittenberg's door, but his echo would have been answered not by one Rome, but by two ancient guardians of faith. Beyond politics and religion, gold flows again. Constantinople remains the gate between worlds. In our history, the fall of the city forced Europe to search desperately for new routes to Asia. Portuguese caravels pushed down Africa's coast. Columbus sailed into the Atlantic, and the age of exploration was born from desperation. But what if that desperation never came? With Byzantium alive, the spice trade and silk trade still passed through the Bosporus. Caravans from Persia and India still unload their treasures in Constantinople's markets. Italian merchants still haggle in its ports, filling their ships with Eastern goods. The prices are high, the profits immense, but the route remains open. Perhaps Vasco da Gama still rounds the Cape of Good Hope. Perhaps Columbus still convinces Spain to fund his mad voyage. But the urgency is dulled. The timelines shifted. Discovery may come later, slower. The Americas may remain hidden for decades more. The age of oceanic empires, Spain, Portugal, England, may arrive not in the late 15th century, but in the 16th or even 17th. The Renaissance still blossoms, for its roots lie in Italy and ancient learning, but its branches spread differently. Constantinople, instead of being a memory, remains a living contributor, sending scholars and manuscripts not as refugees, but as envoys. Humanism is shaped not only by the ruins of a fallen empire, but by the voice of one still standing. Step inside Hagia Sophia in this alternate world. The candles still flicker, the chants still rise, the mosaics still shine. There are no whitewashed walls, no minarets towering over the dome. The art of Byzantium continues to flourish, not fossilized, but alive. Imagine mosaics crafted in the late 15th century, not as echoes of a dying tradition, but as bold creations of a living empire. Scholars debate Aristotle and Plato not in exile, but in imperial courts. The Imperial University of Constantinople, once waning, revives with vigor, drawing students from across the Balkans and Italy. Architecture too changes. Instead of St. Peter's Basilica rising in Rome alone, Constantinople offers its own marvels. New domes, new palaces, blending Gothic stone with Byzantine light. The dialogue of cultures becomes richer, deeper, because Byzantium still speaks. The Renaissance would not be solely Italian. It would be Byzantine Italian, a marriage of East and West that births something different, something the world has never known. For the peoples of the Balkans, Serbs, Bulgarians, Greeks, Albanians, Byzantium's survival means more than politics. It means identity. In our world, these lands groaned under centuries of Ottoman rule. Churches became mosques. Cultures were suppressed. Rebellions drowned in blood. But in this alternate world, Byzantium still protects at least part of the region. Bulgaria remains contested, Serbia divided, but Greece and Thrace stay within the empire's grasp. Generations grow up not as subjects of the Sultan, but as citizens of Byzantium. Their songs, their prayers, their languages carry different shades of memory. They inherit not the weight of defeat, but the resilience of survival. And what of Russia? Without Constantinople's fall, Moscow does not claim to be the Third Rome. Orthodoxy still has its mother in Byzantium, its patriarch in Hagia Sophia. Russia rises, yes, but as a daughter, not as a rival. The entire axis of Eastern Europe shifts, as identity and power trace different roots. But survival is never easy. An empire that clings to life must learn to live with compromise. Byzantium does not rise again to conquer. Its emperors rule smaller lands. Its armies fight fewer wars. Its influence is measured, not overwhelming. Yet sometimes survival itself is the greatest triumph. For centuries, travelers speak of Constantinople not as a fallen jewel, but as a living marvel. Pilgrims still marvel at Hagia Sophia. Merchants still call it the crossroad of the world. Envoys still bow before its emperor, even if his crown weighs lighter than that of Caesar or Justinian. And perhaps, in this world, children grow up in Europe and the Middle East, hearing two names instead of one. The Ottoman Sultan, yes, but also the Byzantine Basileus. Two powers staring across the Bosporus, locked in eternal tension, neither able to fully vanquish the other. The Ottomans, deprived of their great prize, turn deeper into Asia. The West, spared from immediate conquest, grows stronger in time. Between them stands Byzantium, smaller, humbler, but enduring, a stubborn reminder that history is not inevitable, that empires can survive against the odds. What does this survival mean? Beyond politics and trade, it means hope. For the Byzantine people, for those who lit candles in Hagia Sophia, for those who tilled the fields of Thrace, for those who believed their empire was God's chosen vessel, it means their story did not end in 1453. It means their children inherited not only ruins, but resilience. And for us, looking back, it means a reminder. History is fragile. A single choice, a single alliance, a single invention can shift the course of centuries. Byzantium's endurance shows us that survival is not about glory or conquest, but about persistence, the ability to hold fast when the world says you cannot. Thus, the ripples spread. A weaker Ottoman push into Europe, a narrower but stronger unity between East and West, a slower, stranger age of exploration, a Renaissance colored by Byzantine gold, a Balkan identity less chained by Ottoman rule, a Russia less crowned as Rome's heir, all because one empire did not die when history said it should. The smoke of battle clears. The sound of cannon fades. We return once more to May 29th, 1453. Only this time, the story ends differently. The walls have not crumbled. The city has not fallen. Hagia Sophia still echoes with the chants of priests, not the call to prayer. An empire the world thought doomed continues to breathe. And yet, is this not the heart of history? That the line between survival and ruin is often no thicker than a breath? One decision, one alliance, one moment of foresight could have carried Byzantium forward, kept its flame alive, denied the silence that swallowed it in our world. When we think of history, we often imagine inevitability. We say Rome had to fall, Byzantium had to collapse, the Ottomans had to rise. But what if inevitability is only the story we tell ourselves afterward? What if, in truth, the road was never fixed, but full of branches untaken, doors unopened, choices unmade? In the survival of Byzantium, we glimpse one of those doors. A smaller empire, yes. A humbler empire, yes. But an empire still alive, still defiant. Its walls scarred yet unbroken. Its faith tempered yet unyielding. Its people poor yet still proud. Every empire believes it will last forever. Every people believes their way of life is destined to endure. But Byzantium teaches us a different lesson. Greatness is fragile. Even the mightiest walls crumble if left untended. Even the richest markets empty if left unguarded. Even the holiest faith fractures if left unhealed. Yet in our imagined history, Byzantium shows us something more. Greatness is also resilient. An empire that could have chosen unity over division, foresight over pride, compromise over isolation, such an empire might have lived on, not as the master of the world, but as a survivor of it. This is a lesson not only for emperors of the past, but for us who live today. Civilizations fall when they believe themselves unbreakable. They endure when they remember they are mortal. Beyond armies and treaties, Byzantium's survival is, at its heart, about people. The boy selling bread in Constantinople's market, who grows up to see his city not fall, but flourish. The monk copying manuscripts in Mount Athos, who watches his work become part of a living tradition, not a lost relic. The farmer in Thrace, who tills land that remains Byzantine, not Ottoman. The child who looks up at Hagia Sophia's dome and knows it as his inheritance, not as a monument to defeat. History is often told through emperors and sultans, but its truest weight is carried by ordinary lives. And in this alternate world, those lives are not crushed beneath the boots of conquerors, but carried forward with hope. So what do we make of this vision? Would a surviving Byzantium have shielded Eastern Europe from centuries of foreign rule? Would it have softened the schism that split Christianity in two? Would it have delayed the age of exploration, reshaped the Renaissance, altered the very map of our world? Or was its fall inevitable? Were the forces of history too vast, the tides of empire too strong? Was Byzantium always destined to end in fire, its legacy scattered into the hands of others? There is no answer, only the question. And perhaps that is the true gift of imagining history, not certainty, but reflection. For in asking what if, we learn to see what was, and to wonder what might still be. Picture it one last time. The sun sets over the Bosporus. The dome of Hagia Sophia glows in the fading light. The city's walls, battered but proud, stand unbroken. Merchants haggle in the markets. Priests chant in the chapels. Soldiers guard the gates. The empire is not vast, not glorious as it once was, but it endures. And in its endurance lies a truth as old as history itself. Sometimes survival is the greatest victory of all. So the next time you walk through ruins, the next time you see broken walls or faded mosaics, remember Byzantium, not as a fallen empire, but as a reminder that the line between ruin and resilience is thinner than we think. And ask yourself, if empires can survive, if civilizations can endure against the odds, what about us? What choices are we making now that will decide whether we endure or whether we too crumble into memory? The story of Byzantium is the story of all of us. Fragile, resilient, mortal, eternal. This was What If Wars. Thank you for listening. And until next time, remember, history is never as inevitable as it seems.